Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Vice-Chancellor and Principal, Professor Nana Poku, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of Professor Fayth Anese Ruffin, appropriately scheduled during Women's Month. The Vice-Chancellor conveys his congratulations and best wishes to Professor Ruffin. I have had the distinct pleasure and privilege of working with Professor Ruffin as an inspirational colleague in the School of Management, IT and Governance for several years, and so I am delighted to be part of this auspicious occasion. It is also my pleasure to welcome our esteemed guests, members of the Executive Management, members of Senate, our inaugurand this afternoon, Professor Fayth Ruffin, to whom we extend our heartiest congratulations, family, colleagues, and friends of Professor Ruffin. Special acknowledgement to her brothers Louis in Ohio and Paul in California, as well as her cousin, Renee Ruffin-Price in Florida. A special welcome to Dr. Winnie Martins, Prof. Ruffin's first PhD graduate, whose master's dissertation was upgraded to a PhD. Another special welcome to Dr. Felistas Zemano, whose doctoral degree is in both public governance and management disciplines. The respective theses of both Dr. Martins and Dr. Zemano were returned from examiners without the need for corrections or revisions. Let me continue welcoming academics and professional staff, students, alumni, colleagues from higher institutions locally and internationally, distinguished guests. Inaugural lectures form part of the university's public lecture series and may only be presented by newly appointed full professors, and they celebrate the attainment of the pinnacle of an academic career. These lectures present an opportunity for showcasing the exciting and groundbreaking research and teaching being carried out by professors in our university. And they are a significant milestone in an academic's career, providing official recognition of their promotion or appointment to full professorship. These lectures are furthermore an ideal opportunity for new professors to introduce themselves and to present an overview of their own contribution to their field, to academic peers, students, and research collaborators. Inaugural lectures are also a platform for celebrating a professor's academic achievements with her family, friends, mentors, and colleagues. My appreciation once more for joining us. I look forward to Professor Ruffin's presentation on the topic of the rigor of epistemic freedom in public governance, light working in higher education. It is now my pleasure to hand over to my colleague, Professor Stephen Matula, Dean and Head of School in the School of Management, Information Technology and Governance, who will introduce Professor Ruffin more fully.
Thank you so much, Professor MacArthur. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of myself and the School of Management, IT and Governance, I have the honor and the privilege to introduce to you Professor Fayth Anese Ruffin, who in her biography asserts that academy finds her in her third career, preceded by a public management professional and a practicing attorney, or both simultaneously. Besides holding a Juris Doctorate, that is doctorate in law, and a PhD in global affairs, Professor Ruffin is consistently engaged in experiential learning. She proudly presents herself as a warrior liberator who seeks to free people from the colonized mentality that affects all of us, whilst advancing plural epistemologies as a matter of epistemic freedom. Professor Ruffin reflexively observes that there are few common threads that link her career lattice and propel her career trajectory. These are justice, liberation, and spirituality. Justice, as explicated by Professor Ruffin, means historicized conscientiousness, liberation projects, epistemic freedom, and spirituality, which all signal expression of one's highest self. Professor Ruffin is one of those Africans whose ancestors were displaced by both the West and East African slave trades. Born in the African diaspora, she was acutely aware from a very young age of her Africanity. She knew through a deep sense of spiritual guidance from within that she would return to be of service to the continent of her origin. From 2012 to 2015, she served UKZN as a member of Senate and represented the Senate on the Colleges of Humanities, Academic Affairs Board, and on Academic Promotions Committee. Additionally, she represented the College of Law and Management Studies on the University Honorary Degrees Committee from 2012 to 2015, and the University Institutional Forum from 2012 to 2016. From 2013, she served the Department of Science and Innovation of the National Research Foundation Center on Indigenous Knowledge Systems, which is comprised of 5 universities, namely the Northwest University, University of South Africa, University of Limpopo, University of Venda, and the University of KwaZulu-Natal. The Department of Science and Innovation, National Research Foundation Center on Indigenous Knowledge Systems Hub is based at UKZN. She played a central role in UKZN African Indigenous Knowledge Systems policymaking as part of the working group of experts, and engaged in program planning and curriculum development for integrating Indigenous knowledge systems into curricula at UKZN and elsewhere. From 2014 to 2015, she led curricular design and development for Indigenous knowledge systems honors programs for the 4 UKZN colleges as program developer, which led to the introduction of a postgraduate diploma in African Indigenous knowledge systems in the university. Professor Ruffin's approach to education is primarily centered on liberation. She states that she is a warrior on the battlefield for intellectual liberation. Du Boisian pragmatism grounds her teaching philosophy. She lives it as African epistemologies and generates it as continuously unfolding emancipatory education. Professor Ruffin research interests are in multi-transdisciplinary areas. She implements ways of intersecting teaching and learning with community engagement, as well as undertaking research-led community engagement for co-production of knowledge that solves societal problems. This means her work extends beyond the physical borders of UKZN through work with governmental and non-governmental organizations. For her, research findings, co-produced with government, non-government organization, industry, and communities, inform substantive and procedural aspects of contextualized teaching and learning, whilst empowering people and the community. Our research areas of expertise include research methodology, public governance, global affairs, epistemic freedom, and indigenous knowledge systems. Of the 35 graduated postgraduate level students during her 8 years at UKZN, 7 earned doctorate and 28 master's degrees. 90% of these graduates are South Africans, and 52% of them are female. Results of research that she has led or personally conducted has been invited for presentation at international institutions, such as the United Nations General Assembly side event for the 10th anniversary of the Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor, Organization of Economic Development and Cooperation, World Justice Forum, and the African Peer Review Mechanism of the African Union. Professor Ruffin is grateful for being the recipient of Teaching Excellence Awards, including the Distinguished Teachers Award from UKZN and the National Teaching Excellence Award from Higher Education Learning and Teaching Association of South Africa, HELTESA, and Commission of Higher Education, CHE. Professor Ruffin has published widely in books and international journals, delivered conference papers across 4 continents in 10 countries. She remains grateful for various research-related awards, such as Best Paper and Best Presentation. She continues to design and facilitate professional development workshops for academics in various universities, which are driven by promotion of our authentic selves, infusing spirituality and reflexively practicing the non-dualism of the personal and professional to achieve epistemic freedom through light working in higher education. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor and privilege once again to invite Professor Fayth Anese Ruffin, Juris Doctor PhD, to deliver her inaugural address. Professor Ruffin, over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome here. I want to thank Prof. MacArthur and Prof. Matula for your introductions, for which I feel very humbled. And I'd also just like to say, Mamalo, Ndwandwe, Mkachwa, Ntumbizi, Zwidi, Langa, thanking you all who decided centuries ago that when you were taken from the East African slave trade, that you would bring your child back here. And I'm one of them. I'm here to respond to your call. And to all the teachers in my ancestors' family, including you, Mary Noonan, who in 1870 is showing up in the census, is teaching school, even though slavery was only over in 1863. And to all the ministers and the Calders and all the lines and the mediums, I'm thanking you. I'm thanking you today for bringing me here and letting me be with my UKZN family, which is a wonderful family that I've been with now for over 11 years. So I'd also like to dedicate this lecture to some well-known light workers in the UKZN community who have gone on into the spirit world, including Prof. Yogi Pensilia, who was very active in assisting with me coming here to the university, and also, of course, our well-known light worker, Kribben Pillay. They both saw an exit and they took it. And may they rest in peace and power where they are and continue to exude the goodness that they did while they were here. So I'm going to start out, colleagues, by just unpacking a few terms here about principles of praxis. And by praxis, I mean how it is that we do what we do, how it is that we are who we are, and what makes us tick, so to speak. So the terms that I'm going to talk about a little bit would be epistemic freedom, reflexivity, and light working, and how all those dovetail and come into public governance. Now, what is public governance? Well, I encourage anyone to tell me what is happening in the universe that is not related to public governance. Because one way or another, public governance is involved through multiple sectors, whether it's in the business aspect, management aspect, whether it's in the NPO, NGO aspect, whether it's national, regional, continental, global, public governance abounds. And this is why we must ensure that there is epistemic freedom with public governance. Public governance includes things like public administration, public management, public policy, and the list goes on, but it goes wider than that. But unfortunately, sometimes we get preoccupied with sameness and see it in terms of, you know, who the old guys are, mostly old guys in there, you know, like if you don't have Luther Gulick in there, if you know, then you're not doing what you need. If you don't have, what's his name, with scientific management, you don't have all these people in there, then you're not really having the context. Well, it's time to move beyond that. And it's time for us, particularly those of us who are working from the continent, to do like Booker T. Washington said, you know, cash your buckets where you are, put it down and find your own context, find your own theories, find our own ways of being and our own ways of doing things. So epistemic freedom, when we look at that connected to public governance, it means exploring different types of knowledge systems and not being just led by what is given to us, but being more so motivated to interrogate. And reflexivity is about introspection, but introspection personally and professionally. And light working, oh, light working. Light working is very plain and simple. We all have a light, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we want it to be that way or not. Sometimes things are true, whether we want them to be or not, or whether we believe them or not. And we all have a light. As human beings, we have a light, but so do inanimate objects have a light. So does the ocean have its light. So does the river. So do the trees. Because when you really look at it, and if we think about indigenous ways of knowing, we're all one. We're all one. There's nothing really separating me or you from the chair that we sit on other than the way the vibrations are set up. So reflexivity, light working, and epistemic freedom all come together when I'm talking about public governance. And research methodology is another aspect that comes in. In addition to that, thinking about public governance, reflexivity, epistemic freedom, and light working, let's talk about energy. Let's talk about vibration. You've heard that. Hey, bad vibes. Hey, good vibes. What is all of that? And what energy are we emitting as academics, as students, as people in the higher education landscape that want to make a difference in the country and regionally, as well as internationally and continentally? That energy, that vibration that exists within and without, it's holistically prevailing itself, whether we know it or not. And one thing that came from this type of energy is when we moved into a phase as human beings where that if people look different from oneself or one's group, then those people are considered not the same and must be treated differently. How did that happen? Then it goes on to talk about roles and responsibilities will be assigned to them. Then there's this list of dualities as to who would treat whom, how, and when. Why is that? And then that energy was naturalized and embedded with that feeling and vibration. Pure energy being emitted by human beings. But what is that energy all about? And what is behind that energy? And what do we bring behind that energy? And how do we change and develop our energies? Human beings can emit any type of energy that they possess because of our decision-making power. We can choose our energy. We can choose our vibration. And we can decide whether it's going to be clad with notions that we're trying to, most of us anyway, get away from. Notions of freed and enslaved, notions of things like superiority and inferiority, notions of joy and pain, of black and white, of male and female. And one can decide not to look at these things as dualities, but instead to find a way to reflexively focus on oneness through epistemic freedom. What complicates this is that we tend to have a preoccupation with sameness. We get used to operating in the same way, doing the same things, thinking the same things, writing about the same things, teaching the same things. This preoccupation of sameness blocks our epistemic freedom. It blocks our reflexivity. It blocks our light working. So we want to find ways to get beyond a preoccupation with sameness and recognize that difference is not only useful, but also integral to innovation. And we're always talking about innovation. So we have many wicked problems in public governance, whether on a local, national, regional, continental, or global scale. This is why, or at least one reason why, public governance, study and practice must be open to difference and not delayed by the strongholds of sameness. So we can't look at service delivery the same, go and research it the same way we've always researched it and think we're going to get a different result. So we have to come up with new ways of approaching it. But before one can recognize that and really know it experientially, one must be introspective, sufficient to focus on his or her own light. This is about authenticating the unity of the personal and the professional. Whatever your profession is, if your personal light is not being demonstrated, it's very unlikely that your professional light is going to illuminate. So we want to figure out or think about how one's own daily practices in one's personal life, what energies are you emitting? Are you emitting those feelings and beliefs and attitudes embedded with notions of things that we want to be gone by, but we know still exist, of superiority and inferiority? And we know these things are systemic. We know these things have nothing to do with your everyday relationships with people. It has nothing to do with your personal relationships. However, on a systemic level, on an institutional level, it brings about things like privilege without even meaning to. And you know why? What energy was created centuries ago to develop those energies? I'm talking about the building blocks of coloniality. Okay, we can see here outside these blocks, we see colonization, we see slavery, we see apartheid, segregation. This was someone's idea, someone's construction that people all over the world bought into, which is amazing. So it means that it came with a certain energy. It came with a certain vibration. It came with a certain feeling that not only did people buy into it, but it's continued to be perpetuated. So no need to go into a lot of details about everyday examples that we have, even in the higher education sector. But the question becomes, on the issue of sameness, where can we allow epistemic freedom and allow light working and allow reflexivity to come in to bring differences together? Where can we change the institutional culture in a way that every person is more than happy, even excited to bring their light to work every day, to shine it? I know you're telling me, Prof, that's idealistic, that could never happen, but of course it can happen, because we're human beings, we have decision-making power if we decide to do so. Beliefs can be very strongly held, but beliefs can also be changed. There are multiple truths, which is why we need epistemic freedom. And it's through this epistemic freedom that we can start researching various systems and looking at various mechanisms that have been created and implemented that are really perpetuating the world we don't want. And I think we kind of know the world we don't want, because whether you're a person who experiences marginalization or privilege, it's all a type of woundedness, because the whole is not together. There's a brokenness. And this is what we want to bring together. And one of the ways we can do that is through research methodology. Well, everybody knows I get excited about that. So in research methodology, I'm going to be giving examples about this epistemic freedom, reflexivity, and light working as it pertains to some of the research that the doctoral students that I've had the privilege to supervise have come up with through their different ways of looking at things. But before I do that, I just want to point out a few things about different ways of knowing. So, for example, I'm sure have heard that there's what we call African ways of knowing. There are what we call indigenous ways of knowing, which, apply to any country that you would name that has an indigenous population. Whether that's Australia, New Zealand, in North America, South America, indigenous ways of knowing, belief systems, relationships with nature that existed prior to the dawn of things like colonization, slavery, apartheid, capitalism, imperialism. People were actually living and, doing things that we seldom think about in terms of a pre-colonial sense. So one interesting thing in African ways of knowing, really in indigenous ways of knowing, is that there's always this thing with oneness. Even though there's diversity, even the diversity is unified. When Chancellor Williams did his study way back when and produced a book, Destruction of Black Civilization, he talks about going to all the different African nations, and he discovered that there was a lot of democracy happening. But do we ever talk about the African origin of consensus democracy? No, we don't. But countries like Sweden and others, they're using consensus democracy and it's working for them very well. But when independence started coming into the continent, did we go back and look at consensus democracy? Did we go back and look at the pre-colonial governance structures that we had with the family as the main unit? Did we go back and think about the Council of Elders? Did we go back and think about the checks and balances that have been robbed of the institution of traditional leadership, so that the traditional leader could be have more affinity with the colonizers? No, maybe, I don't know. But I do know that there's still work to be done in that area. So my point here is about this oneness and diversified unity, is that when we look at things from a westernized way, we think about different disciplines, and we also think about ontologies being separate from epistemologies, and that being separate from values, and that being separate from the methodologies as if they're different things. But in African ways of knowing, when I use the term epistemologies, I mean all these things, because the state of being or the reality and the knowledge system are so interlinked and so intertwined, and the values are so embedded that there's not a distinction between these in terms of the oneness. So, of course, we more so, in society now with our Cartesian model, we have, psychology over here, sociology over here, and all these different disciplines. But I'm sure if you've checked what was going on in the Egyptian mystery system, you'll see how there was a oneness and a diversified unity. So now the PhD journey. I know I'm shifting gears here a bit, but I hope you're with me. This is what you're seeing now. Of course, it's the Council on Higher Education telling us about the doctoral graduate attributes that are expected. So when you think about it and you look at it juxtaposed against what we've been talking about in terms of reflexivity, in terms of light working, and also in terms of epistemic freedom, it talks about the doctoral candidate must have both a broad and a specialized knowledge base. But we don't want to limit that to once we find a gap in the literature and we're just filling that gap. We want to find a way for it to be epistemic freedom as an outcome. Then insight into related fields. That's telling us right there that, maybe that study is not going to be multi-inter-transdisciplinary in and of itself, but it can't be a single discipline, because we all know with these protracted problems that we have, nothing can be solved in a single discipline. And ethical awareness, that's nothing more than light working if you really want to delve deep into ethics and morality and the moral compass. But it's just not studying it. It's about living it. Because in African ways of knowing, it's all about experientialism. It's all about information as needed. If you haven't experienced it, then you can't know it. You only know it when it's happened to you. So moving on to original contribution, that co-creation can come from the reflexivity and the epistemic freedom of approaching things differently than they've been approached before. And of course, the appropriate methodology goes hand in hand with the knowledge base, the insight into broader fields, as well as the reflection and autonomy that's required, as we've been discussing. So now, and then with number 9, which very important, the critical thinking for problem solving. In other words, how do we bring all of these things together? And what is it that has to happen through the light working during the doctoral journey that enables one to solve problems? That doesn't mean, the PhD student is asking the supervisor this and this and that. It more so means that the PhD student is now enlightening and illuminating the path for the supervisor when this light working thing has happened. Now, another thing I want to say before I leave this, and, in my light working journal, I guess you could tell I'm a light worker. I don't know if you kind of picked up on that. What I find very, very interesting is the teaching and learning associated with postgraduate supervision. So there's so many pedagogies that we can use when we are supervising the masters and the doctoral students. Even if it's a full research master's, even if it's a full research doctorate, there's some teaching and learning going on there, or at least there should be. And, we say that, okay, the thesis or the dissertation is not really, there's no assessments going on. I beg to differ with you, because there's a continuous assessments are happening when you think about it, because you're constantly getting the work and you're assessing it and you're giving feedback. So there is a continuous assessment happening. But sometimes we are used to not looking at doctoral and master supervision. I know there's a lot of people who are already saying or feeling what I'm feeling. So, and I hope you keep your light shining out there, because I feel you saying that now. It's really, really, really important to organize those pedagogies, those supervision pedagogies, in a way that allows the light working of the candidate to come to the forefront. It means asking certain questions, interrogating certain lines of inquiry, so that they realize that it's not just about the intellect, because the liberation of the intellect alone is insufficient to bring the change we say we seek in the universe, in terms of all of us getting along and all of us being one, which we are, whether we realize it or not. So the supervision pedagogies, the teaching and learning, this is where the reflection and the autonomy would come in for both the supervisor and the student, in terms of visualizing things in a way that open the door to different ways of looking at things and different states of being. In addition to that, the appropriate methodologies means things like, with the oneness of epistemologies, ontologies, axiologies, and methodologies, the methodology must talk to the philosophy or the epistemology that's happening. And when you're doing that, or when you try to juxtapose things that people say don't go together, to me, that's where innovation can come from. You just have to go about this rigorously, itemize your points adamantly and fully, clearly, and show what the different criteria are, the steps that you've gone through, to not just believe that there's a sameness or the preoccupation with sameness. So now let's get a little bit more into epistemic lightworking. Epistemic lightworking, what do you mean by that, Prof? Wow, well, we got knowledge going on, but we have different types of knowledge going on. But you're not going to understand the different types of knowledge unless you work in your light. Have we not sometimes found ourselves saying, decolonize the curriculum? What is that? I don't know how to do that. What are they talking about? There's nothing wrong with it. Oh no, does that mean we're going to get rid of all the things we've always known as sameness, the preoccupation with sameness? Is that what that means? Or when you hear the talk about, okay, cognitive justice, there's been marginalization. Well, what does that mean? And why is that? And I didn't do that. I wasn't here then. That was somebody else who did that. The arguments are far and wide on all sides of the street and up and down the avenue, But we all are part of history. That's why it's important to historicize. Whatever your subject is, whatever your area is, historicize it. What was that like millions of years ago? I know you say there's no data on that. There's no information on that, but you'd be surprised. I remember, in growing up in school and, asking my social studies teacher in the social studies book and showing him all the pictures of white people. I said, there was no black people back then, So, there is information available, but we just have to go and research it. So it's very important to historicize and get an understanding of how it is that we end up where we are now. Also, of course, there's problematize. Now, we all know with research methodology, the thing is, at least for me, in my little world, it's not about a topic. I don't want to hear about a topic. I want to hear about a research problem, okay? Because it's the research problem that's going to tell you the topic. And of course, it's the literature that's going to tell you the research problem. So, but then once all that is starting to come together and you start synthesizing what the literature says and you start, getting a grip on where you're going with that, it's important during that doctoral journey now to just sit back and reflect and philosophize a little bit. I mean, it's going to be a doctor of philosophy or something like that. Sit back and get a handle on how we came not just to be where we are, but be retrospective in a way that you can project and be prospective. So with that philosophizing, and then you want to interrogate on this epistemic light working journey. You want to interrogate whatever it is you're being told. You want to question it, and it's okay to disagree. Now, I remember having to write research papers when I was in college, and I have to go to the library and quote all these people, and I would be telling the professor, I was like, yeah, but I don't agree with any of them. So why do I have to, quote them? And then I'll never forget, God bless his soul, Dr. Paul Smith, who's no longer in the material world, in the spirit world. He said to me, you have to understand what you disagree with. You have to know what you don't want, not just what you think you want. And that's going to help you figure out what it is that you want to argue. So pluralism comes in that group. By contextualism, I mean, of course, that we want to focus on how what's going on in one municipality may be different from another municipality. What's happening in the SADC region may be different from what's happening in ECOWAS. What's happening in the continent of Africa may be different from the continent of North America, and so on. So we really want to be able to contextualize and not just look at things in such a way where whatever the literature says and whatever that knowledge base is, that we're just going to take it from there. No, it must be questioned and contextualized. So how many times have we adopted this thing of best practices? Well, they're doing this in the UK, so we should do this here. They're doing that in the US, so we must implement that here. Really? Did we study that in the South African context? Did we ask the everyday people in South Africa what they think? Oh no, that's anecdotal. We need a survey. Well, really, we need both when we think about it, because we need multiple ways of knowing in order to discover. So interrogate globalism. Remember that whole thing a few slides back about coloniality and the structures and the institutions and the slavery and the colonization and all those things that happened? Well, globalism is not exempt from that. What aspects of globalism are perpetuating coloniality? And what kind of spirit, what kind of energy are we bringing to the table to improve the situation? What is it that we're doing to change the vibration of the universe in a way that makes it the way that it needs to be in a more equitable and fair and just society? So there's a constant interrogation and a questioning in this doctoral journey about what one is being fed and what one studies and believes. And of course, the reflexivity is an ongoing situation. Now, that's a big thing in the higher education landscape altogether right now, because we're all in the midst of this institutional audit as reflexive praxis. And what is that asking us? That's asking us to be introspective and look at how are we handling research in higher degrees committee? What are we doing in teaching and learning committee? How does the teaching and learning committee work with the university teaching and learning committee? So these are all issues that have to deal with reflexive praxis so that we can better understand where it is that we are. And of course, the knowledge co-creation in this epistemic light working journey, whether it's on the PhD journey or whether it's just a group of us academics getting together for a research project or going solo, whatever the case may be, knowledge co-creation is key. Because I think we all trying to move beyond the days where the university was seen as this ivory tower, where you have all this knowledge that's being disseminated and all this rote learning that's going on and all this regurgitation of what it is that you're being told. So when you think about the fact that we move beyond that, then the co-creation of knowledge becomes very important. And who is that knowledge co-created with? This can be co-created, of course, with the participants that are involved in a study, whether, it's through interviews or whether it's through indigenous methodologies, seeing things like talking circles that you might have. It can also be knowledge co-creation among colleagues. So the list is endless in terms of how knowledge can be co-created. But it's important for us to focus on that way, like across different universities, across different countries, so that we start to bring to the research spirit and the research space, this whole thing of light working, so that we can illuminate things that can show us a brighter and a better path. So I'm moving on now to how light working can get us to this continuous loop of quality improvement, whether it's in public governance, whether it's in business, whether it's in any field. We all, I think, want to have a continuous loop of improvement. We want to find a way to make things better. This particular time, I'm just going to give a few examples in terms of light working in the continuous loop of quality improvement in public governance through a couple of theses. I won't be able to cover all of the ones that I have planned, but let me just talk about a few of them. One would be about community-based justice. Now, being a retired attorney from the US, basically, I didn't know anything about this community-based justice. I didn't know about the paralegals, the community-based paralegals who work in all these different rural areas and who meet the needs of legal people who, of people who don't want to go to the so-called orthodox legal system. They serve the needs of people who want to use restorative justice and involve their entire families in conflict management, and who want to involve their ancestors in spirituality and coming to grips with issues like domestic violence or maintenance, child support, and things of that nature. So in this particular study, this graduate, Dr. Martins, focused on the role of community-based paralegals and what restorative justice has to do with all of that. And from the very beginning, it was about epistemic freedom in terms of the way in which she undertook the research, because we had made plans for the focus groups. And then the next thing I know is, it's like, no, well, these focus groups, we're going to have breakaway sessions during the focus groups. I'm like, what? I never heard of that. So this is an example of where when you start allowing the student or giving the student space for their light to shine, they come up with new and different ways of doing things. So she did that, and it worked out well in terms of the results from the focus group. Also, another example was the use of narrative analysis in legal analysis. So, I was used to being a lawyer. I didn't know much about narrative analysis, but then in her research and then helping her take her research further, it was very interesting to combine now and look more so at the impact that the law is having on people, not just what the law says, not just about the precedent, but the everyday working of the law. For example, there were a lot of women that were not happy with the Domestic Violence Act. There was a lot of women who were not happy with taking out a protective order because they didn't want to criminalize their partner or their husband. They just wanted them to stop abusing. That's all they wanted. They wanted the family to work together. So it's the spirit and it's the light of these community-based paralegals in all these different rural areas throughout the continent. It's not just it's not just about South Africa, and throughout indigenous communities all over the world, where everyday people, there's community-based justice going on, where people help each other solve their various issues, their conflicts. Now, what's important about that in terms of epistemic freedom is that this is another knowledge base. This is another way of knowing. This is telling us that it's not just about the rule of law. As much as we love it and as much as we, are all talking about it as if that's the only way, it's not the only way. And it's not the only knowledge system that people buy into. And it doesn't mean that community-based justice must be marginalized down here because it's all about the rule of law and the orthodox law. No. Epistemic freedom means that if a person wants to go to the paralegal, even working people, because there's no fee when you go to these community-based paralegals, but even people who are employed in these certain communities, they go to the community-based paralegal. And another thing that the people who go to these community-based paralegals like is the privacy. Because when you go to a courtroom, your business is out in the street, so to speak. But these people, particularly people in rural areas, are very conservative, and they don't want to air their dirty laundry. They just want to fix things. So it's up to us as academics and as students to ferret out these different knowledge bases and come up with different ways of looking at the world, and not stigmatize one way of knowing over another as if it's less valuable. Another thing with this community-based paralegals is the way that they work with traditional leaders, the way that they work with the court systems as well. So even that is telling you about the unified diversity. Even that is telling you about the light that these paralegals obviously have, because sometimes they don't get a salary. So this light working is happening. It's just for us to do our best to make it more prevalent. I'm going to give you a couple more examples in the short time left. And this is on a master's study about indigenous farming techniques. And one of the interesting things about that is that, we're always talking about conservation, nature, we need to conserve nature. And this is going to be a conservation area. Well, what do we think people were doing in pre-colonial times? Do we think they weren't preserving nature? Are they the ones who got us into the climate change issue that we're experiencing now? So before we think that we've come up with something new, we need to understand what happened before, because the farmers were explaining about how when the moon is a certain way, they must plant this. And when the birds do this thing, and that means some other things. I can't remember all the details of the study, but it was very specific of how they work with nature, that oneness, that unified diversity, that light working. But these are the types of things that we must remember, that things like colonization and apartheid, and these are things, wipe these things out and said that these things are meaningless and that these things, are not up to par, so to speak. But when we're doing our light working, we bring this information back, not to return to times that are old, not to do things that they used to be done as they were done in pre-colonial times, but no, just to learn from what was there and to recognize things that we might think are new, like it's not that much new about New Age, really. Because it's about oneness, it's about unity, it's about working with nature, and all of this is fully embedded in indigenous ways of knowing. But if we don't know that, then we think, oh, it's a New Age movement, And then what happens there? Those who were working this old time situation of oneness are not credited for that. There's no acknowledgement. But yet we're the main ones that screaming plagiarism, So it's very important that we want to look back, understand indigenous ways of knowing, and start to come to grips with whatever lessons that we can learn, use epistemic freedom in terms of the way that we structure our research methodology. Now, we have an ongoing study now, which is about traditional fisheries. And it's very interested in that study because, there's law and policy on the fishery industry. But interestingly, the traditional fishers consistently denied licenses to fish. And even if they're able to get a license, but then the commercial fishers get their licenses all day long and are able to go out in the sea and do all the fishing and bring it back and sell it to the shops and feed their families. But the traditional fishermen and fisherwomen whose ancestors had been in the fishery industry from pre-colonial times, intergenerational, are arrested for fishing. Now you go figure. So we have some work to do in terms of light working. We have some work to do in terms of epistemic freedom, because it just so happens that the traditional fishers are African, the commercial fishers are white. No, that can't be. We want the commercial fishers and the traditional fishers to work together, don't we? We want to have the oneness. We want to have the diversified unity. We talk about these ills of inequality, unemployment, poverty, but you know, it didn't come from yesterday. There are some structures. There are some institutions. There are some spirits that were emitted that have led us to where we are today. But fortunately, we're all connected in a spiritual sense to the divine, if you think there is a divine. Even if you don't, just because you don't think it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We've covered that. But when you think about that, we're all a part of God, the supreme being, whoever you determine the divine to be. So if that's the case, then epistemic freedom becomes easier, and light working becomes more enjoyable, and reflexivity becomes a part of our life, whether we do that as an individual or whether we do that communally. So we want to use this knowledge generation through this research methodology, contextualize our application of findings, whether it's PhD research, master's research, or just plain old academic research. But we need a community appraisal of that application. The community must come in and tell us what they think. Is this thing working? Is it not working? And then that must then be funneled into curricular design and development. Because what we research, what we put in action, we must learn from, and then we must teach from that. And then we start to get this continuous loop of quality improvement for public governance. So thank you again, everyone, for joining this lecture today. And may you enjoy your light working.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can hear your real and virtual applause from wherever you are. I noted the comments from people attending who just wanted to engage with you, Prof. Ruffin. On a light note, pun intended, I think we all know now and understand why Professor Ruffin named her puppy Epistemology. We have been taken on an extraordinary journey by our energetic warrior liberator and light worker, a journey that integrates the mind, the heart, and the spirit in a transdisciplinary, non-dualistic excavation of research, teaching and learning through the vehicle of research methodology. I loved your emphasis on organizing research supervision pedagogies to allow the PhD students' light to shine. Beautiful. On behalf of the College of Law and Management Studies, it is my honor to deliver the vote of thanks. I would like to begin by thanking each and every colleague, student, friend, and the family of Professor Ruffin for attending today. We acknowledge the contribution of the family and the academic family in supporting Professor Ruffin in her journey. As a university, we value the role of loved ones who continue to support our staff as they make significant strides in progressing our university. I would also like to thank Professor Matula for introducing Professor Ruffin, and also acknowledge the following for their support and background work for this public lecture: the corporate relations team, the college PR team, the registrar's office, information communication services, and the good people from UTEL who helped directly. Finally, and most importantly, congratulations once more to Professor Fayth Ruffin. Thank you for your significant impact in academia. May you continue to inspire others to greatness. Colleagues, with these few words, I again thank you all for joining us today in supporting and congratulating Professor Ruffin. And I now draw this public lecture to a close. I wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Thank you and goodbye.